The MSI GE75 8RF gaming laptop has some nice specs, but just how well does it perform in games? I've benchmarked 19 different games at all setting levels to show you how well it runs and help you decide if it's a laptop you should consider buying. Just quickly before we jump into the benchmark results, I'll cover off the specs in my unit. I've got the 8RF version here, which has an Intel i7-8750H CPU, 16GB of dual-channel memory, and the older Nvidia GTX 1070 graphics. However, as we've seen in another video, this usually outperforms the newer RTX 2060. The GE75 is also available with GTX 1060 graphics, or RTX 2060, 2070, or 2080 graphics. You can find updated prices to each version linked in the description, and expect different results to what I'm showing here with different specs. I was running Windows 10 with these Nvidia drivers, and just as a reminder, we're only looking at gaming performance here. If you're new to the channel, get subscribed for the upcoming full review. Battlefield 5 was tested in campaign mode and not in multiplayer mode, as it's easier to consistently reproduce the test run. Higher frame rates are possible with lower settings if you need them, though I found it to still run very nicely maxed out at ultra settings while looking great. Apex Legends was tested with either all settings at maximum or all settings at the lowest possible values, as it doesn't have predefined setting presets. It played well even with max settings, still perfectly smooth with fairly high frame rate, with 23% higher average FPS possible at minimum settings. Far Cry New Dawn was tested with the built-in benchmark, and with ultra settings, the average frame rates were fairly good. For reference, the RTX 2060 in the Asus Scar 2 I recently tested was just 1 FPS behind. Far Cry 5 was also tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results were ahead of the newer Far Cry New Dawn just covered. Again, pretty good results for this test. Fortnite was tested with the replay feature, and due to a recent game update, the replay I've used is a fair bit different compared to my previous tests, so the results can't really be compared with my older results. Regardless, even with max settings, over 100 FPS was easily possible in this well-optimized game. Overwatch is another well-optimized game, and was tested in the practice range, as other players, bots, and even different maps in actual gameplay affect the frame rate, and this allows for consistent testing. The 300 FPS frame cap was close to being hit at low settings, and the results are very high, able to take full advantage of the 144Hz panel even at epic settings. Shadow of the Tomb Raider was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the results at highest settings were performing within RTX 2070 Max-Q territory. So quite a nice result here from the GTX 1070. Metro Exodus was tested using the built-in benchmark, which performs worse than actual gameplay, making this more of a synthetic test rather than indicative of actual game performance, but does allow you to perform the same test run to compare with. CSGO was tested using the Euletical FPS benchmark, and like always, high frame rates were coming out of this test, just below 200 FPS with all settings at minimum, but not really much difference between this and medium settings. Rainbow Six Siege was tested with the built-in benchmark, and the frame rates are super high as expected. However, it's worth noting I always use the defaults the built-in presets set, so 50% render scale and TAA. This game seems to perform better with Nvidia's newer Turing architecture based on my own testing, so if you play it a lot, the newer RTX version of the GE75 should go even better. PUBG was tested using the replay feature, and we were just able to hit 100 FPS at very low settings. A bit of a difference compared to the 2060 I recently tested in the Asus Scar 2, which could hit 100 FPS at ultra settings in the exact same replay. Either way, still fair performance. Assassin's Creed Odyssey was tested with the built-in benchmark, and I was getting 60 FPS with high settings. Though still alright results maxed out, as this game doesn't need a high frame rate to play well, and we can't boost the frame rate that much at lower settings anyway. Dota 2 was tested playing in the middle lane with an average amount of action going on, and it was running very smoothly without any problems at all, with high settings able to utilize the 144Hz display while still looking great. Watch Dogs 2 was a resource-intensive game, but despite this, even ultra settings was able to average 60 FPS, which is plenty considering this is a game that I think runs perfectly fine with a solid 30 FPS. Ghost Recon is another demanding game and was tested using the built-in benchmark. Lower frame rates are expected with all but the most powerful laptops at ultra settings in this test. However, there was a fairly good improvement stepping down to very high or below. The Witcher 3 was running well with Hairworks disabled, with 90 FPS possible at high settings and a solid 60 FPS for the 1% low, while low settings allowed us to make use of the 144Hz display, although I don't really think this game benefits much from a super high frame rate. Doom was tested using Vulkan, and is a game that I always find to run extremely well on modern hardware, With the GTX 1070 even maxed out, we're seeing almost 150 FPS with high 1% low. Plenty for a great experience with the 144Hz screen. Strange Brigade was another game that was tested with Vulkan, and was just above 100 FPS with ultra settings in the built-in benchmark, though almost double was possible with low settings. I've only just added this game recently, so I don't have much other data to compare with yet. Shadow of War was tested with the built-in benchmark, and was performing quite well. Plenty of FPS for this sort of game in my opinion. However, this is a title that I've found to benefit more from Nvidia's newer Turing architecture, so if you plan on playing it a lot, the newer RTX model might be beneficial here. Let's also take a look at how the GE75 compares with some other laptops to see how it stacks up. Use these results as a rough guide only, as they were tested at different times with different versions of Nvidia drivers. In Battlefield 5, I've got the GE75 up the top shown by the red bar, and it's performing very closely to the 2060 in the Aorus 15, but I've got a whole video comparing the 2060 and 1070 linked in the description if you're after more examples. Here are the results from Far Cry 5 with ultra settings in the built-in benchmark. This time the GE75 was further ahead of the 2060, and only just below the 2070 max Q in the Apex 15X down the bottom, showing the 1070 is definitely still a capable option. These are the results from Shadow of the Tomb Raider with the built-in benchmark at highest settings, and it was a similar deal, in that it was only just below the best 2070 max Q result, and ahead of the RTX 2060. Overall, the GTX 1070 is still providing excellent performance, and stacks up well against the newer RTX options for around the same price in many regions. However, prices are always changing, so check updated prices in the description. Paired with the 144Hz screen, I think the GE75 is a good option in terms of performance, even though this is now considered last generation in terms of graphics. There was some thermal throttling noted, however, that affected performance, but I'll be covering that in a future video dedicated to thermal testing, so if you're new here, get subscribed for that one. So how do you guys think the MSI GE75 gaming laptop with GTX 1070 graphics did in these games? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments. And get subscribed so you don't miss the full review of the MSI GE75 gaming laptop.